Well, okay, I'll just go and get started. And I do have record on, just as a reminder for everybody that I do record these, and Jim Pitman takes a hold of the recording, creates a link so that yourselves and others can watch it, review it, stop and start as they need to. So welcome, everybody. Thanks for making it today. The agenda for today, any comments from the last meeting? DMS issues. So we're going to cover aircraft documents, again, a replacement. And I see Ernie's on there, so he may be able to help me with that. We're going to cover some more stuff in flight deck management, some radio phraseology issues. And another topic is flight following versus opening a flight plan, the pros and cons of those two, and what the misunderstanding is with some of those with the flight following concept. Going to review a little bit of stall and spin awareness again, and I've got some different scenarios and best practices, and then once more go through the Chapter 9 supplement process, make sure people understand what's in that chapter. So are there any comments from the last meeting? Nope. Okay. Any DMS issues? That's good, because I don't know anything about it. That's where I rely on Craig for that. So regarding the documents again, Ernie, are you on there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. Did we ever come up with a way for the aircraft owners to get replacements for those worn out airworthiness certificates?
The process to do it, there's a email, or I'm sorry, there's a link on FAA.gov that shows you how to use the system, but that's the way to do it.
Okay.
Is you just go on the system and you ask for register for your airworthiness certificate. You go on the AWC and request a certificate. It'll go to an inspector. Inspector will look at it and then issue a replacement.
Okay. Is there anything that you might know of ahead of time that they want to have available to them once they get on that? Or is it simply just the information on the serial number and N number and so forth?
They really need, well, first off, they need to get an account on AWC. That's the first thing they've got to do. And then they've got to fill out what AWC requests from them. And I have not gone through the process, but like I said, on that website, on the FAA's website, there is a link to a YouTube video about 10 minutes long that shows you how to navigate the AWC.
Okay. All right, great. Thanks for checking on that, Ernie.
Now data plates, if you need a replacement data plate, it's the same thing. You write a letter, you send that letter in, why you need a replacement data plate, et cetera, et cetera. You send that to, you request that a letter from the FISDO, from an ASI, and then they give you that letter and you send that letter in to the manufacturer and they'll give you a replacement data plate.
Now, is that for the engine or the aircraft?
Both.
Both, okay. Because I remember.
So if you want an engine data plate replacement, you contact an ASI, get them to write a letter. You'll take that letter. You'll take that letter. Sorry, my dogs are barking. You'll take that letter and mail it to, if it's an engine data plate, you'll mail it to the engine manufacturer. If it is aircraft, you'll send it to the aircraft manufacturer.
Okay. So in regards to, say, the aircraft one, a email to the Scottsdale FISDO will get that process started?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Does anyone else have any questions regarding that? I've still seen a couple registrations or airworthiness certificates that could use a visit to the beauty salon. So
yeah, being a little preemptive, you know, I mean, it's, you know, back when I was a geographic inspector, I was doing the majority of airworthiness certificate replacements, and most people were pretty preemptive, and they'd say, hey, look, this one's torn, or this signature's fading, it's almost illegible, there's, you know, whatever. And at that time, the replacement was relatively simple. You know, we did it right there in the office, but now it's got to be done through AWC.
Okay. And when they do that, Ernie, is it something that's sent back to you electronically and then you hit print?
I don't know.
Okay,
I'll have to look into that.
okay. That was the last question I had on that, was if it'll come through the mail or if it'll end up being a, print once you receive it, like your student body certificate.
Well, all right, toward the end of the meeting, I'll see if I have an answer for you.
Okay, all right, thanks, Ernie.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have any questions regarding the documents on the aircraft for replacement?
Yeah,
Phil,
I'm curious if there's any regulation or any advisory where it is not okay to laminate the documents.
There's, right, let me as clear as I can make this.
Yeah,
No.
Ernie's got that one covered.
No, it is not considered an alteration. You may laminate. My suggestion is if you do laminate, find a laminating paper that also has UV protection, because when you laminate them and they're in the sun, it burns that signature up faster than you can believe. I mean, within 3 to 4 months, it'll burn that signature up. So
Yeah, good point.
there's a lot of us that actually recommend laminating it because it's less work for us and it's less downtime for you guys. But there is nothing in regulation that says that's an alteration.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just a little side note there. Remember on the aircraft, I still see once in a while, I'll see the registration certificate in a little pouch where most people keep these things. Unfortunately, the registration certificate will be the one showing. Remember, it's the airworthiness certificate that has to be visible to the crew or passengers. So if you see that for the examiners out there and the instructors and so on, just swap those around so the airworthiness certificate is the one that's showing. And like Ernie says, usually down where they are, down by your feet and stuff, opportunity to get sun exposure should be minimal. So I also had a cover for ours at the flight school that would cover those up, and we took the cover off when we because of that situation when we flew the airplane. Any other questions?
Hey, Phil, it's Andre. I had a quick question. What is
Yep.
AWC?
Well, ask Ernie that one. AWC, probably airworthiness something. Ernie,
Yeah,
what-
airworthiness, is airworthiness certificate.
oh, got it. Okay.
Yeah,
Oh, I thought
the
it was
airworthiness
a-
certificate automated site.
okay, airworthiness certificate automated site.
I'll post, before the end of this, I'll post the link in the notes.
Got it.
Oh, thank you, Ernie.
Anyone else? Okay, let's move on to flight deck management. This is probably one of the most missed items, both in training and on checking on the check rides. So what are we looking for? Just going through the ACS and the private commercial instrument. How are we doing at training and evaluating requirement to secure all items in the flight deck and cabin? Those tow bars can be interesting projectiles, especially when we start getting into the turbulent weather, oil cans, and so on and so forth. So for those of us that are doing the check rides, just make sure that the individuals understand that they really need to secure that stuff, if not just for them, but for yourself too. So you're not getting hit with this stuff. Are there checklists within reach, whether they're using an electronic one or a paper one? Do they have the cockpit organized before they even get started? And is the POH and AF on board within reach during flight? A couple places I think have those way in the back, and there's really no point in carrying it if you're not actually going to be able to reach it. So make sure that it's accessible for those airplanes that do require those. And then are the applicants setting up the automation radios before taxing? I'm still hearing of individuals making changes to flight plans, radio frequencies while taxing, which in itself isn't a good idea, but doing a lot of stuff after the fact. I understand that for like the IFR clearances, if you're a place like Chandler where you tell them your IFR somewhere, you're going to get the clearance later on. Sometimes while you're taxiing, just tell them to stand by, and then many times after you've got out to the run-up areas where you get it in that point, you can continue getting everything set up. But prior to that, are they doing as much as possible before they start moving the airplane? And then it's a pre-flight briefing completed to include all required items. I have a question for the group. Does anyone have an issue with an individual reading it from a card? Yes, no? Utilizing a safety briefing card or checklist that they read off of?
That seems like a good idea.
Well, in my estimation, it is a good idea. Even at the airlines, as much as we did that every day, sometimes 3 or 4 legs a day, we held that thing in front of us and made sure that we covered everything. Many times we do the briefing as much as we remembered and then back it up with a paper checklist for that. But I was curious as to whether or not the group of examiners and instructors had heard that they were preferred to have it memorized. A lot of times the memorization, like everything else, is just that. It's memorization. And the whole idea is to make sure that they've got everything covered. Any other comments on that? Okay, let's talk about some radio phraseology. So what do we mean by make and model when we're communicating with ATC? So I'm going to ask for input from the group here. You're flying a Cessna Skyhawk. That's make and model. Do you call yourself a Cessna or do you call yourself a Skyhawk, or does it matter?
Well, I'll announce Cessna Skyhawk on the first call, and then I find ATC truncates and they start calling me Skyhawk in November, whatever. And so I'll just truncate along with them afterwards.
It's good. Yeah, I just use the term Skyhawk, but part of the issue is it's a benefit to the air traffic controllers. They hear not so much on the ground, but maybe on the ground is they hear Skylane. I personally have a 182, so I always called myself Skylane. I'm a high performance aircraft. And speaking with the controllers, it gives them an idea of what kind of aircraft they're talking to and what its capabilities are. Obviously, the 150 has just always been called a Cessna 150. It did have a term commuter a long time ago when it was built, but also when you look in the AIM, you'll see Aztec, which means obviously twin, the twin Cessna, the Bonanza is just doesn't have to be called Beach Bonanza. The reason I'm bringing it up is that some individuals were making an attempt to use their term Skyhawk, and I know the controllers may come back and just say Cessna, and then that makes the applicant, student, instructor, whoever, think that maybe they had made a mistake. So that's one of the reasons that this had come up here. So when can we abbreviate the call sign?
It's permissible after ATC does it first.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. When might be a time not to abbreviate it, even though ATC did?
Well, yeah,
When you're
similar sounding call signs.
There you go. That's the addendum to that statement. Paul's absolutely correct. And then below that, it'll state, however, if you have similar sounding call signs, if not for the controller's benefit, but your own benefit, that you are reading back a clearance that was issued to you by utilizing your entire call sign. Okay, this seems to be unique around here. I've checked with some of my buddies in the other parts of the country, but we still have individuals calling themselves at 35, 45, 55. I don't know what purpose that serves, except that we're dealing in the training environment, and we're trying really hard to get everybody to at least start off with the correct readbacks. But I still hear it quite a bit out there, and it should be 4,500 and it's not 4.5. So best we can do, since we're in an environment here where we're starting off with clean slates with most of these individuals, is try to get the readbacks correct right off the bat. How many of you out there have trained or even evaluated with your applicants slash students that the radios give you an indication if they are transmit or receiving? Anybody? Do you guys know what I'm talking about?
Yes, and yes.
Okay, thanks, Paul. By the frequencies is a lot of radios will have, the Garmin's will have a TX or an RX. And in my loss of communication scenarios, I will ask them if they have even noticed that there's a TX up there when they transmit, or an RX when they're receiving. A common one will be ATIS. ATIS is always showing the RX all the time because it's a constant loop. But something that we can throw out there with the use of communications is that the majority of the radios that are out there now, obviously not the old King KX170s and those kind of radios, you can't tell. But with the newer stuff, you can tell that the radio is either transmitting or receiving. And if you're pushing a mic button and keep talking and you don't see the TX on the radio where it should be, you're kind of just wasting your time. You've got another problem. Maybe use a different microphone. Your button is bad, so on and so forth. Same thing with receiving. If you're not getting an RX for anything, you're obviously not receiving anything at all. If you do see the RX and there's no volume, well, there's an indication that you may need to turn the volume up. The RX is shown, but the volume's not up. And that's partly what I'm getting to in this next one here. Are we doing any training or evaluating with the radio issues, explaining to them what their problem could be just by those indications? Any other comments on those? On the check rides, and actually in the real world, we should be filing VFR flight plans. I know that a lot of places say just get flight following, just so everyone's aware of this. My controller friend was supposed to be here today, but couldn't make it. Flight following is just that. If you go off the scope, there's not much of an effort for them to try to find you. They don't know if you simply got tired of talking to them or you found your airport or whatever. But the flight plan is one of the items we're supposed to check on the check rides to see if they know how to open and close the flight plan. And not to mention that that's your best bet for being found if something happens. So just want to make sure that people understand that flight following should not replace the flight plan. It should be in addition to, and we are still supposed to evaluate if they know how to open one and close one as well. There's the options there. Any other comments regarding flight following versus flight plan filing? Are we seeing enough people out there that actually know how to open the flight plan? I've been exposed to so many individuals that have gotten all the way up to their CFI training with me, have never even opened a flight plan. They said, I just use flight following. So once again, just make sure everybody understands that's not the end all to your problem if something happens. Okay, stall spin awareness. Hang on a second, let me check something here. Oh, Ernie put up the link, by the way, for the certificates to be replaced here. So stall spin awareness. We know we don't do the spins on the check ride. There's still a huge discrepancy in the understanding of what exactly is happening with the wing when it stalls, and the fact that we're still staring at the airspeed indicators as we encounter in training and on the checking events, staring at the airspeed indicator to see when the thing is going to stall, which is only under certain conditions. And hopefully we're getting better at in the training portion of it and the evaluation, because stall and spin awareness is on all the check rides. Obviously, we don't do them on the instrument rides, but the question is still there regarding that stuff. And remember that on the private pilot check ride, the stall has to be to a full stall, not the first indication. And then are we covering the knowledge portion of the spin awareness completely in the oral or in the flight portion? And does the applicant understand what's causing the stall and how the wing is stalling, the aerodynamics behind it? And are we testing the spin entry and recovery in conjunction with the ACS BTS? I want to bring something up that is still kind of existing out there. There's a belief that the PAIR acronym, mnemonic rather, is what takes care of you for all the airplanes that you may encounter. Make sure that the individuals, and this is one thing that I believe should be tested, the individuals understand that each manufacturer has their own way of recovering from the spins. They're not all exactly the same. So make sure that for those of you that are training, are covering that part of the POH or AFM. And the FAA states that in the event that there isn't anything in the manufacturer's book, to go ahead and use the PAIR concept. But if there is a special procedure, because some airplanes don't pull the power off right away, that happens last. And then once again, the recovery procedure varies. Make sure that your students and your applicants very much aware of the fact that it's not just a memorized item. And also make sure that if there's a placard that's required in the airplane for the spin recovery, that it is in that aircraft. A lot of those I've noticed have been missing when they were required to be in the aircraft, especially when a new interior was put in. Any more comments regarding that?
Phil, what do you mean on your second to last bullet point? Are we testing the spin entry and recovery in conjunction? You mean just to verbalize that, not actually
Yes.
doing?
Oh, no,
Okay.
that's why I say we're not actually doing it.
Yeah, okay.
If you read the ACS and PTS, it'll say, do they understand the concepts of spin entry and recovery? And obviously, it's covered pretty heavily on the CFI check rides. The CFI had to have a sign off before they showed up, but we still had the opportunity to spin them if they brought a spinnable airplane, if there was any issues with the even the oral portion. Not understanding that, but no, Paul, what I'm getting at is, do they really understand that you can spin when you're flying straight ahead? I had a CFI tell me he was terrified of stalling an airplane in a turn because that's how you spin. Well, needless to say, that check ride didn't go on much longer because he totally did not understand the concept of of how an airplane enters a spin. But I also think that in our efforts to make things shorter, unfortunately, we've lost the intent to spend more time on spin and stall awareness than just the rote, give me a spin, give me a stall to the left or a stall straight ahead. And I'd like to see the group both testing and training and evaluating spend a little bit more time on that, especially in light of what we've been seeing in the industry for the past couple months. If it was up to me, I think a private pilot would be shown all the stall entries, not just the power on and power off, but the accelerated, which doesn't happen until the commercial for some reason, the accelerated cross control elevator trim stall. I've always thought these should be shown. They don't have to be demonstrated, but shown to private pilots of all things, because they're brand new at this. And I think they should be exposed to all the different variations of how that airplane can end up in that situation other than just being surprised. But no, Paul, that's what it is. It's an oral discussion.
Got it. Thanks.
You bet. Anyone else comments on that? Okay. I threw up a couple more scenarios here. Each time I do this, I try to throw some scenarios up there for different phases of flight. And this one is the cross-country planning. Sometimes I will throw up a TFR in the process of having them develop a, plan a route for the destination. Sometimes I give them weather that might be ceilings that may prevent a routing over the mountains where they may have to do a diversion in some other direction. Close the airport due to an aircraft accident as a reason to give them a diversion. It says, or turn back towards your departure airport. And the other scenario I'll give them is where the airplane's just plain too heavy or it's out of CG limits. I don't know how many of you all give them, have them do the weight and balance, which of course they do, but I would throw in there an issue where it was out of range to see if that was caught, because they tend to get used to the same two people being in the airplane with the same amount of fuel with no variance in what could happen out there. Then weather preventing proper clearances for airspace. An altitude needed for the trip cannot be attained. That's coming up here this time of year where some MEAs may not be met, or even some VFR flights, up into Colorado and so on and so forth, may not be able to attain the altitudes. They're looking for 11.5, 12.5, something like that. And along those lines, I get to see if they understand that the service ceiling is not an indicated altitude. It's still not quite understood that if it says 14,000 feet, they're going to get there indicated 14,000 feet. So we want to still consider that they may not quite fully understand that. Have a VOR outage. I've seen a lot of the cross countries are done with GPS directs and things like that. Remember, we're supposed to look at 3 types of navigation: pilot age, dead reckoning, and VO and radio navigation for the private and commercial. So I may have a VOR that's not working. Then same thing with GPSs for maybe some instrument work. And a situation where the aircraft is held down to a lower altitude by ATC, causing an excessive fuel burn. Question that I ask: if you leave with the right amount of gas, how much gas do you have to land with at your destination, VFR daytime? That's a question for y'all.
30 minutes.
30 minutes. Who said that? Paul?
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
Anyone else? Keep in mind what the question is that I asked. How much fuel do you have to land with at your destination?
Different question depending on the fuel burn, isn't it?
Okay, that's what I said the first time, but I always have to emphasize how much fuel do you have to land with at your destination. I will bet you, if you ask that question, the majority of the people are going to say 30 minutes. And I said, why? Well, that's your reserve. I said, do you have to land with 30 minutes? So in our travels here, if y'all think about it, make sure that everybody understands that's for planning purposes only. That's it. They can land with 2 gallons on board. If it due to high winds or diversion or getting lost. But I've actually had some tell me that they would, if they found out they were going to land with less than 30 minutes, they would actually land somewhere else, get gas, and then press on. And I'm not talking about actually landing with 2 gallons on board, but they're concerned about burning into that reserve. That's what it's there for. So make sure everybody understands that. Questions on that?
Okay, you got me.
Well, that wasn't the intent, Paul. So what do most of you hear when you ask a person when does their medical expire? Don't all answer at once now.
Usually they'll answer me that it expires on the date of the medical of, the 2 years, the 6 months, whatever, which is incorrect. It's the
My first class medical, when does it expire?
Depends on how old you are.
Okay, there we go. Now somebody asked another question. That's getting better. My third class medical, when does my third class medical expire? I got it on in October of 2021.
Also depends how old you are.
Okay, well, at least nobody said 60 calendar months, 24 calendar months. The average individual will tell you the memorized duration of the medical, not when it actually expires. So when I ask the question, when does your medical expire? They'll say, oh, it's good for 60 calendar months or 24 calendar months, which isn't what I asked them. So what I'm looking for is that they correlated the concept of what they memorized and can give me a date. So that's another one of those questions, Paul, like the fuel thing.
Yeah, and that's another point, but the thing I usually run into is I have to explain to the primary students the difference between the expiration of the medical and the disconnect of the privileges that you utilize. And it
Yeah.
takes a little bit for them to understand that difference.
That is the next thing I was going to ask was they'll tell you that, you know, what class medical do you have if they got a first class and now they've had it for a year, and then they'll say, I have a second class medical. No, you don't. You have first class medical. It's your privileges that change, not the class of the medical. And we used to see that once in a while when people would fill out the IACRA forms or the paper forms. If they were given a first class medical and it was a year down the road, they would write second class in the box. And it wasn't, it's still a first class. That's what they got. It's the privileges that change. Okay, any other questions regarding these scenarios? I got a couple more here. For emergency approach and landing, I have thrown out other scenarios other than just yanking back the throttle. We have a engine low oil pressure, or a sick passenger, or flight control malfunction, weather's bad, fuel starvation. These are all other options for getting them to come up with their own reason for doing an emergency approach and landing. This one here, the limited engine RPM, is probably the most confusing one. I can be over the green fields in January, just south of Chandler, and be stuck at 1800 RPM. And I'll actually make it back to Chandler, no problem. If it's August, I better be looking for a place to land pretty close, like I'm a helicopter. So this is another one that could be, they could be exposed to a little bit more than just pulling that throttle back and say engine failure. So just food for thought. That's another one there, because now they really have to think, do I maybe have enough RPM to get to a better spot to put this down? Not necessarily an airport, but a better spot than the jungle that's below me. And also the electrical system loss. What's going to be different for the night flight? Well, they're not going to have the landing light. So I'd like to see if they're understanding that with the loss of the electrical system, you know, the landing light's not going to be working. Okay, self-assessment. This isn't covered that much. I don't think so in a lot of the check rides and some of the training. I know some of the schools do have the form that they use. That's good, but not everybody does that. And I noticed probably a lot of the freelancer independent instructors are not using this as much as they could. When I ask them about self-assessment, I get a funny look sometimes, but some more things to think about. Do they understand the difference between proficiency and currency? What method are they using? The I'm safe checklist. Other than just a rote reciting of the checklist, does the applicant actually correlate the knowledge to a scenario? So they'll rattle off the IMSAFE, but I'll give them a situation where they have to pick one of those and see if it works. Here's another question for you. If my BAC is 0.04, am I legal to fly? Anybody?
No.
Who said no? Ben?
Yeah, because even though they might still be under the influence.
Well, that's the second part of it. But just looking at the BAC, Ben says no. Anyone else want to say no? Forget about being under the influence. Just look at it as your BAC. Everybody afraid to answer?
Doesn't the reg say less than?
Who said that?
This is Jim.
Jim, very good. That's exactly what the reg says. However, once again, we've gotten into a mnemonic, rotely memorized answer for a lot of our questions. And they'll say 8 hours bottle throttle 0.04. And a lot of times they stop there. And Ben mentioned under the influence. Under the influence is the most commonly missed one. And probably of the three is actually the most critical, more than anything. I remember when we went over at America West, we went to the American 8 hours, I think it was, from flying to, from drinking to flying instead of the 12 or whatever it was we used to use at America West. And they were concerned that people understood, don't look at the hours so much. Look at whether you're under the influence. That's probably the most important of those three. But it actually does say less than 0.04, but our group out there is kind of memorizing 0.04 as that's okay. So once again, just make sure everybody understands what it actually says. Memorizing the number is not the solution. Got to read what it says, but that's correct, Jim. And then the other one is when you're speaking with people about proficiency versus currency, whether they're learning in an analog or glass cockpit, I've always made it a point to check with them. Not check with them, but check on their abilities after they've learned in a glass cockpit. How would they feel flying an analog 172 or vice versa? So that's something else that you might want to throw out there when you're talking about proficiency versus currency with the aircraft. Any other questions? Okay, let's tell you what, let's talk about your questions there. Paul, your short field question, go ahead.
Okay, short field, the scenario, what happened is I was covering a student pilot who's just getting pretty close to their check ride. And I was asked to just take him out for a lesson and help him practice some landings. And he did a short field landing technique of simulating over a 50-foot obstacle. And once you're clear of the obstacle, kind of dropping it in. And I wasn't scared. I was just a little taken aback on the technique. And we talked about it a little bit. And I understand the rationale. I trained in Colorado. You come in on a short field, you got pine trees. Yeah, drop it in. He was not dangerous. But I said, well, here we pulled out the ACS. I said, do you think that at that time that you did that, was that a stabilized approach? And he kind of went, well, I don't know. And I said, well, look, I'm not your primary instructor, so I don't want to get in the middle of it, but I'm not sure that would be real cool on a check ride to do that. And so, we carried on, and that's my question to the group here is, I said, I don't know that's not really a stabilized approach once you kind of drop it in like that. Rather than just coming in on a stable glide path. So that was my question, just to get a little discussion about that. That's all.
Yep. And do any of the examiners want to answer that question?
I'll just give some input. You could always use the scenario that there are pine trees close to the edge of the threshold, in which case that decision would be justified. But if they're in the absence of mentioning an obstacle, then I would be a little, I would be thinking, is this person just trying to chop and drop, or is this person in their head trying to clear an obstacle? So I guess it depends on what scenario you provide.
Anyone else? The examiners?
I'll jump in and apologize for being late to the meeting. Me and about 80 other DPs just got done with our annual training in Oak City on Zoom. So thanks for letting me chime in. So yeah, I absolutely agree with what Paul said about the stabilized approach being the priority. And I also agree that there could be a legitimate scenario with trees. My other input would be that this is a private pilot check ride. It's not a mountain flying checkout. And I think it's important for people to understand the difference. And I think that's basically what you were saying, Paul. And so even as a DP, if I were to give a scenario with trees, we're also taking into account things like the fact this is a low time private pilot. We've already discussed risk management. We've already discussed personal minimums. It's not like I'm expecting them to show me that they can get this thing into a 500-foot dirt strip next to 50-foot pine trees. It gets a little ridiculous at some point. So I would much rather, the FAA has told us in the ACS that they would much rather see a stabilized approach.
Okay, anyone else?
Yeah, this is Mark. As far as the ACS goes, we don't necessarily have to come up with a scenario that has an obstacle for the short field approach and landing.
That's correct.
And years ago, we used to do that. And the policy back then was you had to have a stabilized approach where you did not chop and drop, where you would establish a standard rate of descent that would clear the obstacle, and that would determine your touchdown point, was that rate of descent that you had already established before you flew over the obstacle. But I think on a private pilot check ride, the two things I'm looking at the most, besides touching down in the proper attitude and airspeed, is, are you touching down within 200 feet of the spot that you said you're going to touch down, and are you on speed? Was your approach speed proper? But I don't normally give them the additional obstacle on a private pilot type approach or check.
Okay, anyone else? In regards to my thoughts on that, there shouldn't be any chop and drops, even if there is trees at the end of the runway. You simply make a steeper approach. There's a really good picture in the airplane flying handbook of what's good and what's not good, and it does show the trees. The obstacle was left out of the ACS. Actually, I think it went back as far as the PTS. They got rid of the 50-foot obstacle. There actually are some individuals that still think it's in there, and they're teaching it that way. I don't evaluate it that way because that's not what it says. It doesn't say anything about an obstacle. The other issue is, for some reason, we feel that utilizing the 1,000-foot marker as our touchdown point is a good idea. I disagree with that for these reasons. We're trying to teach them how to land in a short field. For what reason would we want to waste 1,000 feet already? Also, if you're really landing in a short field, there aren't any 1,000-foot marks. You're lucky if you even have a center line. So just once again, things to consider to make these testing events more and more real is that have them pick the spot, but it doesn't have to be the 1,000-foot marker. But what they're doing is wasting 1,000 feet of pavement behind them, because I'm telling you, when that happens in the real world, they're going to do what they were trained, not what's really supposed to be happening. That's pretty much all they have to go by. But stabilized approach is just that. It's coming down at a constant rate, and there shouldn't be any sort of chop and drops anymore. You just simply will come down slightly higher, a little bit steeper, and on speed, and that can still be controlled, by the pilot with the use of power and flaps.
Phil,
Yes.
quick question. So, I agree. The ACS says that the applicant can pick the spot. Now, I will lie, in previous, I actually was picking the spot. What are some of the best practices that the other examiners are using to get them not to pick the 1,000-footers? Because of course, that's what they're all going to do.
Okay. Anyone want to answer that?
Well, let me jump in ahead of the examination, and I'll tell you what I was taught, and the way I teach is we change it up. I don't let them pick a 1,000-footer all the time. We're going to pick the end of the runway at the threshold.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to pick the top of the number. And so we're going to change it up a little bit. So that's how I was taught and how I teach, to just mix it up. And like you said, Phil, the real world.
Yep. Anyone else?
But I think the applicant's going to go for the easy win of the 1,000-footers. That's why I was always picking before.
Well, once again, you know, when you look at the ACS right here, it says, let's see here, establish a recommended. I'm looking for what the ACS says about picking out the spot. I can't see anything where it says who does it, of course.
If I remember correctly, it's actually in the risk management section.
You're right. It is. There it is. Yep. That's it. What I did in training was I started with a 1,000-foot marker because they're brand new at this. So that gave them a big old spot to aim for. And then I would kind of do what Paul's talking about. I would move it more and more progressively towards the end of the runway. Now, the first thing that I know somebody's thinking and may or may not want to say is that when you get them close to those numbers, that's when the pucker factor starts to come in, because if they land short on the 1,000-foot marker, granted, they didn't, you know, satisfactorily complete the event, but you also didn't rip the gear off the airplane. So I think we just have to use some common sense with how close do we want them to get, so that if they do come up short, they're still landing on pavement. So what I've done in training is start at the 1,000-foot marker, work my way back towards the end of the runway, and basically I'd give them you know, a spot that was, like you say, Paul, just above the numbers where there is some more pavement underneath them. And of course, you know, if you see them landing short, there's a point where we just have to say my aircraft, and that's the end of that event. Okay. I can't tell you how many times I've seen people actually land in the dirt, you know, with someone else on board, either in training or during a check ride. And that should never happen. If you got to take the airplane, you got to take the airplane. But
Hey,
as for the, yes, go ahead.
This is Jim again. So just to correct that last statement, I just pulled it up in the ACS. It is actually skill number 5. I think I've got the right one here. This is private pilot, short field approach and landing. Skill number 5, select and aim for a suitable touchdown point considering the wind landing surface.
Yeah, I just saw that. I
think it's important. I absolutely agree with what you're saying as a training point, and I think the important part of this discussion that we want to make clear is that there's a difference between training and testing. And for training, here goes my dogs. For what Paul said about, oh my goodness, I'm sorry, my office door is open. I should. About picking different spots. Please absolutely do that during training. For the test, we need to follow what the guidance is from the FAA, and skill number 5 says to select and aim. That's talking about the applicant's responsibility. So it's very clear that the applicant needs to pick that, as Brian pointed out. So what I do is I let them pick. I actually do this on the ground with a satellite picture of the airport, just like a Google Maps kind of view. And they say, okay, I want a touchdown here, whatever it is, they pick it. And I say, okay, everything before that spot is rocks and cactus and rattlesnakes. So it's part of the scenarios we're saying that's not usable runway. That's the way I handle it.
Well, I agree to a point. If you really want to make these things real, and we should be, the actual, I disagree with the training and testing are 2 different events, because we're trying to make these check rides, you know, train like you fly and fly like you train. That's a common statement that's popping up, been popping up for the past couple of years. It shouldn't be any different. So what I do is I say, you did a calculation before we left. It said you need 1,340 feet to land this airplane at this airport today. That's how much runway you have, 1,340 feet. So what I'm looking for is, tell me what, you know, what spot you're looking at for your touchdown point. That's what I have to use for my gauging of the 200 feet or whatever it is. But I simply say, you know, if you want to waste 1,000 feet behind you and you can stop it at 440 feet, good on you. But I give them a situation where they actually have to utilize those numbers that we did earlier, because there's really no point in doing all that stuff. Same thing for takeoff. I'll tell them that the Chandler Airport runway 4 left is 1,800 feet long. You know, can we leave today? So, and by saying that, what am I expecting the applicant to do without me saying another word? They should be doing a short field takeoff. This is what we're attempting to do, is to get them to make the decision, get them to decide what kind of a takeoff or landing to do. We're going to land in the grass next to the paved runway at Ak-Chin. We're not really going to land on that, but that runway we're landing on's made of dirt. I want to hear them tell me. I don't like to state, I want a soft field, I want a short field, I want a normal. I want them to tell me what they would use in this, because that's the risk management part of this process, is are they planning for the right of, for the correct landing or takeoff under the conditions the examiner / instructor gave them. So eventually what the instructors should be doing, and probably are, is working you towards the testing scenario where it shouldn't be any different. By the time they're ready to be signed off, what they see on the check ride should be the last couple of things the instructor showed them in their training. It shouldn't be any different. It starts off different, but it should be working up towards, okay, this is a situation. What are you going to do? Anyone else? Paul, did that get your question answered?
Yeah, great input. Thanks all.
You bet. Okay. Now you want to know about cross-country logging.
Hey, Phil, I was going to give one more suggestion.
Oh yeah, sure, Ben.
Sometimes with the scenarios that I use when we're in the pattern, I can kind of gauge by the runway markings, the 1,000-foot markers, whatever, at what the distance of the runway is. And then I'll tell them, look, on that taxiway there's about 2,000 feet of runway. So when you land, at the end of that taxiway is the end of the runway. They get to pick a landing site then that they think will give them the required distance to land within their calculated distance. So just another suggestion.
Yeah, that's similar to what I do, Ben. Give them a taxiway and say, there's your 1,340 feet that you said you needed to land this airplane under these conditions. So it's kind of the same thing. They actually know where the end of the runway is. But I need to know, as we all do, we just need to know what's their planned, touchdown point. So that's unfortunately what we have to use to gauge the validity of the maneuver. Once again, if it was up to me, I'd say this runway's, 1,200 feet long, and I need to see you land this and stop before you run off the end. That's the way I would evaluate a short field landing and not worry about the touchdown point. But I'm not the guy that writes these things. But to me, you give them a big piece of pavement, you tell them how long it is, and did he or she stop the runway without skidding the tires before the end of the runway? That's the way I look at it. Okay. Any other comments on that? Nope. All right, next question. Paul, your question about cross-country.
Okay. Yeah, part of this is for my own logging on cross-country time. And then, of course, as I teach and explain to others, logging cross-country time, not for aeronautical experience. So we can put that off the table. This isn't for aeronautical experience. This is merely logging cross-country time. We know that you take off at A, land at B, and that's cross-country time unless ATP doesn't have to land. But can you log all of that time if you're doing various other things? In other words, if you were to take a cross-country flight that normally from A to B should take about an hour, but instead you're doing scanning work, survey work, maybe slow flight, dinking around, whatever, can all of that be logged as cross-country time? Or does a portion of that have to be logged as merely flight time? I don't know if that explains where I'm going with this, but selfishly for me, I do a lot of survey work. I'll take off out of here, I'll land somewhere out in California, and I'll do a scan where I'm going to be doing mowing the lawn circles for an hour. Is all of that cross-country time?
Okay, anyone want to input to there?
Yes.
Is that your answer? Yes?
Well, you don't like my answer?
No, I do. I was saying.
No,
didn't-
I love
saying
Jim's
yes.
answer. I'll take Jim's answer.
Yeah, I didn't know
Thanks,
if you were
Jim.
saying yes, I'll answer, or yes, yes. you
Oh,
can.
okay, sorry.
That's my understanding as well. When you're talking about cross-country time, not for aeronautical experience. Okay, that's when we start to get into your time for the ATP rating. Okay, it has a different clarification for cross-country time for that 500 hours you need for that. That's cross-country time. If I fly from Chandler to Aachen, that's, not for the purpose of a rating, that's cross-country time. Now, the issue is, how do you log those things? So I think everybody's pretty much, they understands that that's cross-country time. However, there has to be a way to differentiate required aeronautic experience cross-country time versus just basic cross-country time. So the issue, Paul, would be, at least for the examiners and the instructors that are trying to sign somebody off, see if they fill in all the squares, is how they log that. So that's the issue.
So Paul, the specific part you're asking about, it would be as long as it's the same flight. So if you flew in circles for 5 hours and then touched down somewhere, more than, well, generic definition, doesn't matter how far away it is. But say you're even counting for private pilot considerations, you land more than 50 miles away. As long as the airplane was moving under its own power for the purpose of flight, that whole definition, then yes, the whole 5+ hours is cross country, even if you just landed somewhere 51 miles away.
Yeah, then thanks, Jim. I guess I'm kind of looking for the confirmation bias, because reading regs, it says nothing about except if you're flying in circles, or except if you're doing, none of that.
Yeah, the letters of interpretation I've seen on it just quote the 61.1 definition and the definition of flight time. So put those two together and you're good.
Yeah, okay. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Sure. Any other comments regarding that?
And Phil, I'm afraid I'm gonna have to exit off at 3. I appreciate you moving my questions up, and appreciate everyone's input. So we'll talk to you all soon.
No problem. Thanks, Paul.
See you,
Okay.
Paul.
Okay, once again, just review chapter 9 out of the POHs, AFMs. Make sure everyone understands that there is valuable information in that section of the book. It needs to be reviewed depending on what kind of equipment you have installed in the airplane. And I think, well, I just put it up here. I'm still running across issues where people do not understand or know what the limitations are for autopilot engagement and autopilot disengagement on the aircraft that are equipped with such equipment. So in the process of our training and checking, we want to pay attention that they understand those limitations as well, because they're not in the standard limitations section. Once again, if you do have certain equipment, there's proper test procedures that are required for certain components on that aircraft, one of them being the autopilot on some of these airplanes. And understand that there may be different certification requirements for the installed or added equipment, and it would be in that section as well. And once again, the normal procedures for the equipment, it's in chapter 4, but many of the normal procedures for that installed additional equipment is going to be in that section right there. Okay, point of contact. Any questions on the supplemental section of the POH? No. Okay. Well, let's see, Jim, you're there. Anything from Deer Valley?
Nothing new since last meeting.
Okay. Let's see, Todd's not up there. Brian, you're there. Anything from Falcon in the West Valley?
Just the construction on the ramp by CAE still.
Okay. Anything else?
No, sir.
Okay. And we don't have anything from Bill Scott, or I see Kim's not on there and Jared's not on there, so no other information from there. Okay. Any issues and problems anybody wants to discuss? Anything from a procedural standpoint?
I have one, Phil.
Sure.
I'm not sure if it's under issues and problems or procedural, but I'm discovering up here in Prescott when doing instrument check rides in the past, when doing a circling approach off of one of the approaches to runway 12, the tower is making all the circling approaches or all the missed approaches to happen before reaching the missed approach point. In other words, commence your go around or your missed approach 2 miles prior to the threshold. Do not overfly the airport, any portion. And I talked to a couple of students who, through certification rides, that was being allowed. Is anybody else amending the MDA? What I've done in the past, and you guys can tell me if this is right or wrong, is amended the MDA with Phoenix approach so that I would not be in conflict with the tower pattern and therefore be able to fly to the missed approach point and meet the requirement of the ACS. So just thoughts from the rest of the group.
No, that's a real good question, because at Chandler, before they stopped letting us do opposite direction approaches, they would give us basically a different MDA of 2,200 feet or whatever it was, and that seemed to be okay. Anyone else have a comment regarding that?
I usually run into it at Scottsdale when the pattern's busy. Tower will tell us to remain at or above 3,000 feet. My understanding is for certification, as Ben's alluding to, we need to go to minimums. We need to go to missed approach point. My understanding has always been for it to count for the check ride, the only official deviation would be if there's a NOTAM. Like I think there's still a NOTAM at Chandler, if I remember right, that the actual MDA for one or more approaches is higher than what's currently published. So, okay, there's a real life NOTAM, we can use that. But the example back at Scottsdale, I try to get on the radio and be like, hey, we need this for a check ride. Can we please come down to minimums? And usually that works, but not always. Yeah, my understanding is we're supposed to go to minimums for the test.
Anyone else? I think that's definitely a letter to be drafted. And any of our FAA gentlemen still on? Greg, are you there? Rock, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here, Phil.
Okay. Do you have any information on that? Last question.
No information other than what y'all have talked about, but we do have pilot controller forums coming up, Prescott and pretty much every airport around. That might be a discussion to have there to see if there's some sort of a compromise.
Well, I think that's half the problem. The other part is mostly what Ben and Jim are referring to is, while there can be a compromise, what is actually legal for us to call an approach? So there's actually an order, or SAFO, I guess they call it, for what you can count for your 6 approaches. I can't remember what the number is on that one, 12051 or 1215021, something like that. Tells you how you have to conduct the approaches for currency, but it doesn't list anything about testing, so that's not really going to help us. But maybe somehow we can get a letter to Oak City to say, what is your interpretation? I remember looking that up a while back, and I've never found a letter of interpretation regarding that. So it might take us to write the letter, but I know exactly what Ben is asking when they do stuff like that. Can we count the approach? Honestly, if the minimums change, the minimums change. You're watching for the individual to do certain things at minimums, whether it's 1,000 feet, 500 feet, or 2,000 feet. The applicant has to do certain things, and realistically, how high the airplane is, except for maybe a performance issue, really doesn't make that much difference. You're still seeing what you would need to see in regards to the elements.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, Phil, but doesn't it say in the ACS for non-precision and precision, we have to fly them either to the missed approach point or the decision altitude, which means that
you mean a MDA?
Short.
The MDA, you mean?
Oh yeah, MDA, but MDA to the missed approach point and commence
Well, that's just it. The missed approach point is a geographical point. It's not an altitude.
Right. But
Okay.
they won't let you, they won't let you fly at a lower minimum to get to that point.
Oh,
In
I
fact, they
see.
won't even let you get to the point. They want you to commence your missed approach like a mile or two.
Okay, I
prior.
see. Yeah, you're right. You're right, Ben. So that, no, that wouldn't comply. If they're making you go, I'm trying to remember if somewhere it said, in the logic behind that, either ATC directed or what was published, but I think that's definitely something we want to get a letter to Oak City or the interpretation guys. No, I see what you're saying now, Ben.
Hey,
It's,
Phil.
yes, you're not even making it to the MAP. Okay.
Yeah, the only ATC directed language off the top of my head is just that, the long cross country for the instrument. That might be what you're thinking of there. And I apologize, Ben. I see I did kind of take your question in a different direction when I started talking about altitudes, because I think your original question was about, having to go missed before or break off the approach essentially before the missed approach point. That is different. Both are valid concerns, and yes, it'd be nice if we could get some more direction from the FAA. Craig, if you can run that up the flagpole or whatever the appropriate procedure is. Phil, I do disagree with you a bit that we see what we need to see with a higher MDA. That approach at Scottsdale, case in point, that VOR Alpha at Scottsdale, it takes a certain amount of skill to get, even at the published altitudes, to get from Geltz down to the MDA in a timely manner. And there is some skill there that I think is important to evaluate. Whereas if the MDA is artificially higher, then that approach, I don't want to say it's too easy, but there's a skill there is my point.
No, you're absolutely right. I made a generalization of, are you coming down to a 500-foot MDA or a 1,000-foot MDA where there is no step down associated with it? So no, you're right. You got to take a look at the approaches. So that was more of a generalization than anything. It depends. Plus the other issue is going to be is the circling approach. So we definitely want to see them at the MDA, or they're 100 feet above and their little tolerance there, because that will make a huge difference when you're doing a circling approach 500 feet above the ground versus 1,000 feet above the ground. So yeah, it would definitely be unique to each approach. But I see what Ben is saying. They're not quite making it to the missed approach point. So theoretically, that's not complying with the ACS. So if we can, maybe Craig, if that's something you could tackle for us, that'd be greatly appreciated.
I'll look into that, Phil.
All right, thanks. Okay. Thanks, Ben.
On the topic of procedures, is this a good time to talk about no touch and goes?
Sure, go right ahead.
So this has been a long-standing discussion about the opinion of different DPs of whether it's appropriate to do touch and goes when evaluating takeoffs and landings. Last month was the first time that I'm aware of that we heard of FAA direction on this, specifically saying not to do touch and goes. And I think it was Bobby that went to the training last month. Well, that's the training that myself and several others just finished today. And it was a hot topic today. Boy, oh boy, you could, it was a lot of passionate input from people all over the country. We literally had DPs from Florida to Alaska with us today. And so they were just as surprised as I was to hear it last month. And so the training is being done, what is that, AFS 640. They basically said, hey, don't shoot the messenger. This came from AFS 800, which is the branch that dictates how practical tests will be done. And long story short, AFS 800 has said that because a touch and go is not in the ACS, it's not in the airplane flying handbook, it's really not a maneuver that is defined by the FAA, DPs shall not do touch and goes on check rides. And I wanted to ask the question, I'll go ahead and pose it here and then tell you that I didn't even get that far because they made it so clear. My question was, okay, what about an instrument check ride, where we're not really evaluating the takeoffs and landings specifically like we are on a private or a commercial? And Scottsdale, again, I just had this yesterday. Because of noise abatement, you all probably know you can't do a stop and go at Scottsdale. So your only option on a check ride is to do a full stop taxi back. Well, when there's 5 or 10 jets waiting for IFR clearances, you know, there's a certain point where there's inconvenient and then there's just ludicrous. and we got to do a landing if that's our circle to land, because you know, my understanding is a circle to land is not a circle to land. If you don't land, can't do it to a go around. So my question was, can we do it for an instrument check ride? And they were being so black and white about it that, you know, you look in the ACS, and even the instrument ACS talks about doing a landing. And basically what we were told in training today is a touch and go is not a landing, it's a touch and go. And if it's, you know, a stop and go is okay because you came to a full stop, but if those wheels don't stop turning, that's not a landing, is basically what I heard today. Brian, you were there. You want to chime in? Did I interpret any of that wrong, or am I on track with what we were told today?
That's funny because I had the exact same thought during that. I was thinking of my typical IFR flight that I go to Coolidge to do the VOR in either circle or the RNAV and do a touch and go and then go back out on the other one, and thinking, wow, I guess that doesn't count anymore. We got to do a full stop taxi back with the jump planes. That could be a little bit interesting. But no, they were very clear. And I do see their one point of it where they're saying there is no grading criteria. There are no standards for this touch and go. So you unsat somebody on a landing that was to a touch and go, they have a pretty good argument to say, well, where is the guidance for this touch and go landing? That seemed to be their biggest place to go from. There's nothing from the airplane flying handbook that shows any guidance on how to accomplish a touch and go.
Thank you. That's all I had.
Okay, anyone else?
Well, since we're at it, the other thing that came up in there that we've talked about collectively as a group is the forward slip to landing being counted as a normal landing. I know the group had been kind of mixed on that, and they definitely came out and said, nope, that counts.
They were talking about combining elements that are appropriate to be combined. And, you know, so they give an example, you're, you know, during the diversion, you're also evaluating pilotage and dead reckoning, or, you know, or at least pilotage. And then a different example, as Brian just said, was the applicant chooses to do a slip to land, and then they follow it by a normal landing. Can you count both of those tasks? And AFS 640 told us yes. So there you go.
I'll take that one step further too, Jim, just to reiterate the touch and go thing. They were very clear that if we were to be like a seed check or anything along those lines, it would not go well in our favor. And they also said, due to the POG that they're doing the training for our oversight, our management specialists, they know to be looking for that we should not be doing any touch and go landings.
Okay. Any other comments or anything from the meeting that you guys were in it want to discuss?
Those were the hot topics.
Okay. All right. Let's see. I don't know of anything from airspace or airports. Jim, anything from your end of it, from the AFTW?
No, other than anyone who may be at this meeting or watching this recording, if you haven't yet, please come over to aftw.org. And most of our communication between meetings is, and you can find next meeting there on the main homepage in the top right. But most of our communication between meetings is on the Facebook group, Arizona Flight Training Work Group. Parentheses AFTW is what to search for on Facebook. I'd love to have anyone there that's interested in aviation or flight training safety in Arizona.
Okay. Thanks. Nothing from the professional side of it. Any feedback from the schools or instructors? From the DPE side of it, I'm going to give the schools and instructors an opportunity to speak here in a minute. But any feedback from the DPE group regarding schools or instructors?
Yeah, so you guys remember the topic about having the check ride endorsements referencing part 141 instead of part 61? I thought we had put that to rest, but I did see that at a local flight school recently, and that did come up in the training today. It's important that everyone understands, even when someone graduates from a Part 141 course, and then they go to take their check ride with a DPE, the check ride is conducted under Part 61. That's important for everyone to understand. So the endorsements are referencing Part 61.
Got it. Okay, anything else? Okay, we don't have any mentoring going on right now. There are no committees. I'm pretty much it. And I don't have anything there. We just talked about AFTW and anything from the FAST team, Craig, if you're still on.
No, sir, nothing.
Okay. All right. No other programs that I'm aware of. Anybody else know of any programs that are coming up? All right. Okay, any other comments from the DPEs? Anything from our guests and our FISDO individuals?
I do have one, Phil.
Okay,
It's something that's come up on the professional side, which stems back to our training side. I'm sure anybody who's got airline experience in here, maybe you've been asked a lot when people are filling out their applications for the airlines, they're being asked, have you ever failed a check ride on a lot of the applications? And I think like we're talking about using correct radio phraseology, using correct phraseology for what a practical test is, and of course exam is, a stage check is. I think by using the word check ride, we're really creating a lot of confusion to a lot of these kids. And that it's been taking quite a few emails going back and forth just with the managed people of my airline, trying to decipher what is considered a failed check ride or a failed practical test or failed stage check. I don't know if it would do the group or the flying community any good to put out something about what a practical test is and or a certifying event is at all.
okay. I never been doing interviews for so long at America West US Airways American. It was pretty cut and dry. If there was a 6149 endorsement in the logbook, that was a failed check ride. We didn't get into the stage check portion. It was interesting because the individuals that were interviewing, one of the reasons they had myself and Larry Taylor in there as check airmen, but also a lot of the individuals doing interviews didn't know, they had no idea what a 6149 was. So when the individual would say, no, I never had any problems with the check ride, and I would play dumb and go, what is this? What's a 6149? What is that? Oh, it was nothing. It was just a misunderstanding or something. Well, the individual actually, wasn't truthful with us. That's too bad, because for what it's worth, for everybody out there doing these for so long, it really has very little to do with getting hired, not getting hired. At least at the airline I worked for the three transitions, we were more concerned about, did you tell the truth and what did you learn from it? That's what was important. And while you're talking about this stuff, Benjamin, to people, explain that to them, that it's not to get too wrapped around the axle about that stuff, but what did you learn from it? So that's what we cared about. I mean, you go through this process, you could have that day was just not your day, and your whole career shouldn't be based on that having a bad day, or the evaluator having a bad day. Something could have gone either way, and they decided to run it one way or the other. But I don't know the solution to that one, Ben, but basically what we looked at was if we saw a 6149, that was an unsat check ride. We didn't look at the stage checks and all that other stuff.
Well, see, that would be part of the confusion because, for example, Embry-Riddle Part 141 with examining authority, when a student goes up for their final test, that's an end of course. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they don't even receive an endorsement for that. Passing that test is the last step in finishing the course. So if they don't pass the evaluation 3 times, they never received a notice of disapproval.
Right.
So they wouldn't be lying if they said that they didn't fail a practical test or check ride.
Right.
In fact, they did fail 3 times.
Well, once again, that's where they have to use a little common sense. and realize that this is what I went through. I went through a Part 141 program. I had 3 stage checks that were not successful. And we had people tell us that, Ben. We'd have plenty of people from Embry-Riddle and the other schools that had that type of testing, which was the other thing that the chief pilots that I interviewed did the interviews with me. I had to explain to them how that process worked too. So all we wanted was a comment, an answer to the question that, yes, I failed my instrument rating check ride, or I did have a stage check. And we had them tell us that I failed, at Embry-Riddle, I had an instrument stage check that didn't go that well. And this is what happened. We were more concerned, not so much, we're concerned that they told the truth and what did they learn from it. But I can see some of the confusion with what you're saying there. But basically, most of the people that I talked to said I had a stage check that was not successful. Some of them had a type rating from the airline that they just got typed with or were flying with, or a PC proficiency check that went south. And we would ask them, when we asked the question, Ben, we would say, did you have any training events that were not successful or any check rides that were not successful? And that's how we asked the question. So
Okay.
that eliminated anything, should have eliminated anything of any concern. So I don't know how they do it up there with you, but what we always did was we were cognizant of that. And we wanted to see, were there any training events that were unsatted? And that actually included, maybe they were doing five sim sessions towards a type rating, and session number 3 had to be repeated. Okay, so we also got that from them too. But mostly, we just want them obviously tell us the truth, but what did you learn from it? So
Right.
but hopefully that would eliminate the problem, depending on how it was asked.
I guess my focus on that was more like if we could start being a little more careful what we call a check ride instead of being a practical test instead of a check ride.
So Ben,
Help alleviate some of that.
this is Jim. I absolutely agree on the importance of using proper terminology. One of my pet peeves has become people who still call it a BFR. And I think there's practical reasons, why the FAA doesn't want it called that anymore. But
Or a pilot's license.
yeah, there's all kinds of examples. So if you're suggesting we stop using the word check ride, we're going to need to get the FAA to do it first. Because we both heard check ride a lot of times, this morning in our training, all day in our training. So they're teaching us the word check ride. And I just did a search on FAA.gov. Check ride with a hyphen comes up more than 2,000 times, and check ride without a hyphen comes up over 900 times. That's just on FAA.gov. So they got some cleaning up to do if they want us to stop calling them check rides.
If I could throw one last comment in there regarding the terminology. I have heartburn, for lack of a better word, with the way that we tell someone they were not successful. And that's the words I use. I cannot stand the word "you failed today." I cannot stand "you busted." I know it says failure on the NODs. Boy, do I wish they would change that word to something other than "did not meet the standard." How many times? 1, 2, 3 times, whatever. But that's what actually happened. I just don't like telling people, and I know it's not something that's going to change overnight just by my little spiel here, but it'd be great if we could say, today we just didn't meet, you didn't meet the standard today. But I hate the word failure. I know it's on the NOD. I wish it wasn't. And I hate the word bust, or, you didn't do so good today. For what it's worth, ladies and gentlemen, if we could just try to, that's the hardest thing to do about this job. Same thing in the airlines. Many times you got guys that are at the high end of their profession here, and you have to tell them, just didn't work out today. And simply what we were teaching our check airmen to profess was, today we just didn't meet the standard on that maneuver. But I cannot stand the word failure, bust, and things like that. So that's my little spiel on terminology for when the check rides or training, or what we call them, checkers, practical tests don't go as aren't successful. So there you have it. Any other comments from the guests? And thanks for that stuff, Ben. Any other comments?
Phil?
Yes.
This is Rock, and this is in relation to Ben's question concerning end of course tests for schools that have examining authority. I
Yes.
would urge everyone to look at a legal interpretation from August of 2015, which is issued to Palm Beach Helicopters to Mr. Dan Crow Jr. Amongst a few things in that legal interpretation, there is a sentence on page 2 that says an end of course test under Part 141 is a practical test when administered by a school with examining authority. It goes into further details in that legal interpretation as to how they come up with that definition. But if you guys just want to go to the legal interpretations page on the FAA website, and like I said, this is titled Crow Palm Beach Helicopters 2015 legal interpretation.
Say it was Palm Beach Helicopters.
Crow dash Crow CROWE. So Crow
Oh.
dash Palm Beach Helicopters
Got it.
2015 legal interpretation. And I know this because I've run into this as I'm the POI for Embry-Riddle as an example. So that legal interpretation clarifies, I think, what Ben is asking.
Okay. Thanks for that. Ben, did you get that?
Yep, thanks, Rock.
Okay, appreciate it. Anything else? All right. Thanks for attending. The next meeting for you guys, I think if I'm not mistaken, it's May 5th. Is that correct? From our FISDO gentlemen?
Yes,
I'll
that
speak-
is correct.
May 5th, okay. And I don't know the times on that. So, and next, beyond that, so there won't be any DPEAG meeting in May. So it's bad enough I had to hit you guys up twice today, or you got hit up twice today. So the June one will be determined down the road here, and there's where you can send, we do have a DPEAG email address for those of you that didn't know. That's it right there, or you can send your questions, comments right to me. And then, as I said, the meeting has been recorded, and yes, Jim, I did remember to hit the button.
Good job, Phil.
Yeah, and that will, I'll shoot that off to Jim here when it's done downloading, and he'll come up with the link. And hopefully this way that we're doing the logging on was a lot easier than before. So, because you basically are going to have the same consistent log on for these meetings. So if there's any issues with that, please let me know, but hopefully that worked out good.
No issues. It worked out great, Phil. Thank you.
All right, thanks. All right, guys, ladies, thanks for attending, and we'll see you later.
Thank you, Phil.
You bet.
Thanks, Phil.
Thanks, Phil.
You bet.
Appreciate you, Phil.
Bet. Thanks.